Shrewd Manager Christianity's position. The corner is likely a subtle reweave and not original, so can't tell us the shroud's age. Shroud researchers Marino and Benford propose that the corner is a 16th century invisible reweave that expertly blends original and newer threads. The labs tested the blend and not just the original. Critics mock the idea of invisibility. It's true, invisible weaving sounds like a fairy godmother helped, but it is a real thing. Marino cites 3 20th century books and this video that demonstrate the invisible reweaving method. So even in modern times of mass-produced textiles, a market exists for undetectable repairs. This skeptic writes that the theory suffers from a major difficulty. How do you demonstrate the presence of something apparently invisible? Chemistry, microscopy, history, UV photos, and high-resolution enlargements are a good start. A more reasonable framing of the issue comes from textile expert Mechtild Fleury-Lemberg, who held the shroud and thoroughly examined it, finding no reweave. She states that invisible mending does not mean that the operation has to go undetected by the expert. To such a person, mending will of course always be noticeable to the naked eye. She adds, as these repairs have been executed with the naked eye, they can also be recognized without a magnifying glass by the trained eye. This sounds reasonable, but is it? No. Following that logic, we should say Michelangelo's David wasn't handcrafted, since our eyes can't see chisel marks. Plus, we've already seen a microscopic image of a single thread is really 2 threads spliced together with an invisible resin coating. The 3 bits are only apparent when vacuumed apart. Regardless, if you have a better tool, use it. Jewelers use loupes. Textile experts should use microscopes. Marino and Benford showed high-quality pictures to 3 textile experts without telling them they were looking at the shroud. One said the area was a patch. The second called it touched up to prevent unraveling. The third noted a thick-thin pattern on the right side, whereas the left is much more consistent throughout. This museum curator writes that all of the major European courts had teams of skilled weavers employed to repair high-quality textiles. The 16th century weavers were magicians at concealing their handiwork. At that time, the shroud owners were one of the wealthiest, most devout families in Europe, ideal patrons for such a task. This textile expert from one of the reweave businesses examined high-resolution enlargements of a carbon-dated swatch cut from here. She notes stained areas that accentuate changes in weave pattern. Just what we'd expect for new threads, expertly rewoven into existing cloth and dyed to match. This side has a much tighter weave than this, consistent with the 2 areas having different fibers with different characteristics. The direction of the stain within the fabric seems to be influenced by the weave structure. The marked locations could indicate that certain characteristics within the weave attract or drain the stain, like a riverbed demarcating a rewoven section. The thickness of the yarn varies just along this line. This staining is too linear to be random. Red markers indicate possible stitches. The blue markers look like a break in the weave pattern. The yellow line shows one yarn's path is interrupted. Here she sees a disruption that sits along a contour of linear staining. Combined, all her observations, within her exact area of expertise, are consistent with the dyed, thread-by-thread reweave. Who is right? Is it an invisible reweave or not? We're convinced the evidence says it is. It doesn't matter much, though, to our major point. The corner is so different, it tells us little about the shroud. Don't confuse explanations with the facts they seek to explain. Think of the facts as a hand, and the reweave theory as a glove. Discard the glove and the hand still remains. Even Fleury-Lemberg, while discarding the reweave theory, writes, the presence of the greasy dirt deposit at the removal site alone would be sufficient to demonstrate the uselessness of the carbon-14 method. Let's end with one more line of evidence. Statistics. Several detailed studies show the 3 carbon dating labs' statistical analysis, and therefore their conclusion, is seriously flawed. The labs report 12 official subsamples of the cloth. Statisticians found that the age of a piece at the top edge is systematically younger than that of the adjacent piece. Since all 12 subsamples are from the same piece of cloth, the radiocarbon ages should have been equal, but they were not. The raw data contain serious incongruities and don't validate the 95% confidence level the labs assured the press. The study wraps up with the suggestion that the sampling site included a patch added centuries later, a repair having been made to the corner. This is consistent with all the other evidence and with one additional observation. Although the shroud fibers are dirty, like very ancient linen found on Egyptian mummies, polluted by dust, spores, and mildew, the labs received reasonably clean samples, similar to a 1653 copy of the shroud. A newer corner, perhaps? In sum, many lines of evidence converge on the same conclusion. The 1988 carbon-14 tests don't tell us the shroud's age. As an aside, the closer we examine the corner, the clearer the handiwork. This makes sense. The seamstress's task was to fool human eyes, but they had no tools to fool microscopes. However, the shroud itself is very different. The closer we examine that, including Jesus' image and the blood, the deeper the mystery. See videos 2.1 through 2.11. Next, we revisit the three pillars supporting a medieval age and show all have crumbled. Then we'll introduce two historical artifacts that directly and independently challenge a medieval date.